So I'm sure your natural inclination will be to applaud them when they arrive. That'll be quite welcome, and then there'll be a minute or two while we have the photographs taken, and then we'll get on with the Hustings itself. So almost ready to start. I think there are 8 hustings in total, but I'll talk about that later on. I just want to make a couple of points before we start. First one is you all have camera phones with you. We'd rather that they weren't used all the time, but if people are using them, please use them to take pictures of the candidates, not of each other. That would be appreciated at this stage. Secondly, this is being live streamed, and we expect people to remember that it's being live streamed. And thirdly, this is a contest amongst friends, and therefore we expect it to be positive and constructive and forward-looking and informative. And that's the type of evening I shall hope at the end we will have. So what will happen now is each of the candidates will speak for 6 minutes. We'll hold them to their 6 minutes, and then we'll start the process of asking questions. We haven't taken questions in advance. The lights are very bright, and I'm going to have to identify people by raising their hands. I would ask people, when they do get called, to say who they are, and then we'll try and work our way through. The question should be for all the candidates. We're not taking questions for individual candidates, it's for all the candidates. The 3 candidates are known to you, and they drew lots before we started, and the candidate to speak first is Humza Yousaf. Humza.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much. Friends, my late grandfather, Mohammed Yusuf, came to this country 61 years ago. I don't think in his wildest imagination or dreams could he imagine that his grandson, 61 years on, would be in contention for the job of First Minister of Scotland. And the reason I say that is because I wanted to start with a bit of hope. Because we know that when we look at the news, life can be quite difficult. But I think as a nation, we should take great pride in the fact that somebody's race is not a barrier to them getting, or at least being in contention for the top job in this country. And that's something I think all of us should take great pride for in our country here in Scotland. I wanted to start also by paying tribute to Nicola Sturgeon. She will be immortalised in our history books. The service that she has given to our country, to our movement, and to our party. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to Nicola for all that she has done. And as exceptional as Nicola is, and she is exceptional, I want to chart a new course. I will be my own person, but I also want to build on the amazing legacy that she has brought forward. 15 years, over 15 years, of winning election after election. 15 years of growing our support for independence. 15 years, over 15 years, of being the national government of Scotland. That is a legacy I want to build upon. And how have we managed to get here? We've managed to get here because our values chime with the majority of Scotland, because we have that progressive agenda, and because we have delivered good government and continue to do so. And friends, I'm impatient. I'm hungry for independence. We need independence now. And the reason we need our independence, well, look, to put it frankly, I am tired of the damage and the harm Westminster is doing to our people time and time again. I'm tired of their Tory cost of living crisis, which is causing harm to our citizens. I'm tired of policy after policy that causes damage and inflicts damage on our fellow Scots, from the hard Brexit to immigration policy to the bedroom tax to, as I say, the damage that they're doing with the Tory cost of living crisis. How can we accept that we live in a country that is energy rich, but our people are fuel poor? I want to be the leader of the party and the First Minister that leads us to independence. Why do I think I can do it? Well, I've got the experience. Over 10 years in government. Some of the toughest jobs in government, justice, transport, and of course, now health. And I've been able to deliver in those jobs, whether it's roads and railways as Transport Minister, or overseeing the completion of the Queensferry Crossing, or as Justice Secretary, expanding rights and protections for victims of domestic abuse, announcing a pardon for minors who were convicted during the miners' strike in the 80s, or whether it's in health, the fastest COVID booster programme in the entire UK. And health is not without its challenges. I'll be the first to absolutely admit that. But how much more difficult would those challenges be if we had nurses and ambulance staff on strike. Scotland is the only nation in the UK that has avoided strike action by the NHS, not by accident or good fortune, but because I reached across the divide, brought parties to the table, resolved disputes where I could. And those are the type of skills I want to bring if I am elected as the next leader of the SNP. And why do we need our independence? Well, I've already explained some of that. But how do we get there? And our opponents are desperate for us to talk about process. Process is important, and I'll come to that in a moment. But we can't get bogged down by process. We have to talk about our vision for independence. Because you know what? If we build the popular support for independence, if we ensure that we get a sustained majority for independence, not fluctuate from poll to poll, but a sustained majority, then independence will become the political reality, the political inevitability. But we have to get out there and talk to people, not get bogged down by process. But of course, we have to talk about how we get to Indy and how we get to independence. So if I am elected as the leader of the SNP, on my first day, I will instruct HQ to restart the Yes campaign. In the first week, I'll get those regional assemblies set up so our membership can come together. And we, the leadership, take the collective mandate from our membership on the route to independence. But in the meantime, let's not wait for that discussion on process. Let's get out there and talk about policy. Because it is our vision for independence, why we need independence, that has made so many people come to our cause. That is what we have to evangelize about. That's what we have to speak to people about. And I believe in a Scotland that is socially just. I believe in the well-being economy. Yes, I absolutely want to grow our economy, but I want to do it in a way that, of course, the economy works for the people. And I will give you absolutely this guarantee. We'll talk about our vision. I'll give you two guarantees and pledges to finish on. One, let's make sure that this debate is an absolute positive one. Whoever wins this, of course, I'm in it to win it, but whoever wins it, I promise you, I will stand right behind our leader. But secondly, let me give you an absolute pledge that I don't want to just be First Minister. I want to be the first activist with you, chapping those doors, pounding those pavements, looking in the whites of the eyes of people and persuading them of why we need our independence. If we do that with conviction, with our progressive agenda, as a socially just, independent Scotland, I promise you our independence will come.
And now, Kate.
Well, thank you very much. The best plan to deliver it. My passion for independence is fueled by my desperate, unflinching desire to eradicate poverty in Scotland. I come from a part of the world which is seeing energy being generated in Scotland and billions being created for big business, whilst next door, families and households are struggling to pay their bills. That is not an inevitable case. That is not an inevitable situation. It is because of one very simple problem that we face, which is that the decisions that are made about Scotland's future are made 100 miles away by people who are not seeing the impact on our people. And so whilst this debate is about independence, it's actually about something more than that. It's about the kind of Scotland that we want to live in. It's about a Scotland where tolerance is the ruling norm, where difference is welcomed, where equality of opportunity is the birthright of every child, and where we make poverty history. Over the last 6 years, I've had the pleasure of serving my constituents and also being Scotland's Finance and Economy Minister. And I see a growing, prosperous Scottish economy where we unleash the potential of our industries, where we're supporting our small and medium-sized businesses as one of the key ways to reinvest in our public services, one of the most critical elements to eradicating poverty, and one of the most central battle lines when it comes to making the case for independence. And make the case for independence we must. Perhaps for too many years, we've become the party of referendums rather than the party of independence. I started as an activist when I was 17 years old, which was perhaps closer than for some of you here tonight. And I remember getting on board a campaign bus from the Highlands, and I think it was the Glasgow East by-election, we started chapping doors, making the case. The progress that has been made since then has been profound, because we've ensured that independence is no longer a concept which people don't understand. They know what the opportunity is. And our job is to persuade people. If elected as First Minister, the first job I would do on day one is to set out an independence action plan, a plan which outlines precisely how we are going to increase support for independence, but more than that. It sets out that in 2024, at the next Westminster election, we will put independence front and centre. And in that election, we will fight for the right to hold a referendum within 3 months of that election. Now, that approach will not just be discussed and established by SNP leaders in the hierarchy. That approach needs to be built by the members. We have a huge membership, over 100,000 members, full of talent, reflecting the diversity of the Scotland that we want to build. It's important that all of these decisions go back to members. So whilst in government, we focus on ensuring that we have a growing economy, that's eradicating poverty, that's reinvesting in our public services, because those are political decisions that demonstrate the kind of Scotland we want to build. Whilst that's important, it's the party that needs to determine the future for independence, that needs to make the case for independence, and we need to be listening to our members when it comes to informing that future approach. And so that Independence Action Plan will focus on increasing support and focus on demanding the right to hold a referendum. But more than that, we need to look beyond independence, because independence for most of us is a means to an end. For me, that end is eradicating poverty and ensuring that our children grow up in a fair and sovereign country. But we need to look beyond independence and set out our plan, our action plan for the next 10 years. Yes, it will answer some of the questions that the people of Scotland have, particularly those that are not yet persuaded of independence, questions about the economy, questions about infrastructure, but it will also set out the decisions that we would make with the full powers at our disposal for making Scotland a fairer country. And that needs to be built by members. The policies in that 10-year plan need to be informed by members. It needs to be approved by conference. It needs to be approved by branches the length and breadth of this country. If we're going to win independence, we can only get there together. If we're going to win independence, we must persuade those that are not yet persuaded. Independence is coming. It's coming sooner than most people think. We've got to be ready. I think we will be ready, but we need a clear action plan to get there. Thanks.
And now, Ash.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming out to listen to us talk about the future of the party this evening. It's great to see so many people so engaged and wanting to be involved. It's really great to be back in Cumbernauld. I spent a lot of time here when I was growing up, particularly when I was quite young, as my grandparents lived in Cumbernauld for 50 years. They lived in Greenfalls. Anybody from Greenfalls in the room? Yay. And my granny ran the sweet shop in the town centre. It's been gone a long time now because she died a few years ago, but I don't know whether any of you will remember it, and I used to work there sometimes in the holidays. So I'm the candidate for change and not for continuity. So I want to restore that mission that allowed the SNP to replace Labour as the dominant party of Scotland, and independence for Scotland and for good governance. But I think we are facing a bit of a crisis in Scotland. We have a moment in front of us here for the SNP. The cost of living is increasing. Many families are struggling to make ends meet. So under my leadership, we'll prioritise getting through this crisis by fighting for things like fair wages, for affordable housing, and access to healthcare and education for all. But we can't forget our ultimate goal of independence. And it's the only way to ensure that we have that full control over our economy and also over our destiny. And that's why I'm putting forward the voter empowerment mechanism, which will allow us to move forward with independence when the people of Scotland are ready. So we need good governance to achieve our goals. We need to restore the trust of the Scottish people in our ability to govern wisely, to govern sensibly, and to govern competently. And I believe in a very collegiate style of governance, where people of ability are appointed to the top positions and where they are allowed the freedom to flourish and get on with the job in their own portfolio. Under my leadership, we will re-establish our track record, we will reform our team, and we will reiterate the vision of an independent country with parity of esteem in the world. So I'm also the unity candidate for the independence movement, bringing together those who have felt excluded, whether that's by accident or by design. And the vehicle for doing this is the Independence Convention, which I've committed to establishing. It will consist of all the other pro-independence parties, as well as Civic Scotland, the business community, trade unions, think tanks, and give everyone a voice on how we move forward on the issue of independence and strengthening the democratic instruction when it comes from Scottish voters provided through the ballot box. So I want the membership of the SNP to be left in no doubt that for me, independence is the immediate priority for Scotland. We can't afford to wait any longer. And it's time for Scotland to take control of its own destiny. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, each of you, for that. We've heard over the last week or so lots of people with questions for candidates, not all of whom have been in the SNP. But tonight is the opportunity for members of the SNP to ask these candidates about what their priorities are. This is your chance now, whether that's about independent strategy, whether it's about the cost of living crisis, whether it's about Brexit, whether it's about the next election. What matters most is your priorities as members and what it will influence your votes in this contest. So I'm going to take questions now by people raising their hands. I want people to identify themselves and might be helpful if you knew where they were from, which branch or whatever they were from, and then to ask their question, and then I will take the questions and give each candidate a chance to answer. Hands are going up, but there's a hand right in front of me here, so I'm going to take first hand here. On you go, sir.
Ian Murray, I'm the Political Education Officer for Falkirk South, and also one of the proud stewarding team for SNP conferences.
Ian, there's a microphone for you. Thank you.
Ian Murray from Falkirk South Branch, Political Education Officer, and also a member of the stewarding team for conference. What will the candidates do to counter the misinformation, lies and antipathy aimed at our party on a daily basis by journalists based in Scotland?
Well, I'm going to start with Kate and work my way along, please.
Well, this is the bread and butter of my job, in particular when it comes to finance and economy, because often the lie is heard that Scotland can't afford to be independent, whereas all the facts and figures show me Scotland can't afford not to be independent. And I think there's a number of ways of doing that. Firstly, can I just point out, in terms of the approach I set out in my opening remarks, that would have to demonstrate, as part of our action plan, how to ensure that Scotland's growing, thriving, prosperous economy is reaching those businesses and organisations that need it and eradicating poverty. We look at comparator countries around the world, countries that are a similar size to Scotland, and we ask ourselves, why are they wealthier, why are they greener, and why are they fairer? They don't have, many of them, the inherent advantages that Scotland has, and yet they have better results. And it strikes me that it might just be because they're independent, rather than shackled to an economic system that's old-fashioned, out of date, and doesn't serve Scotland. So in terms of the direct answer, I think it's about equipping activists like you and me and others in the room, equipping activists with the facts and figures that we can deploy easily and quickly on the doorstep. It's not the case that people get most of their information anymore from the press. They get their information from a whole host of different sources. And we need to ensure we have the facts and figures at our finger to ensure that we deploy them easily and quickly. And we ensure that starting the campaign again from day one as First Minister, that campaign focuses not on spin, but the facts, because the facts are what we need to make the case for independence. It's facts in and of themselves that are persuasive, and whether it's pensions, whether it's mortgages, whether it's currency, whatever it is that's being used to spread fear, we can counter it very easily with the facts.
Ash?
Yeah, it's really frustrating, isn't it, when you see this sort of messages being put out there and you think, oh, I know that's not correct, and then people seem to be kind of lapping it up, so it is very frustrating. But we know mainstream media, you know, is a declining medium, and I don't know, I mean, obviously there's some younger people in the room here. I've got twin sons, they're 19, and they never watch television, you know, they just don't do it. They get their information through other means, you know, I think they use Twitter and various other social media apps. So there's obviously more and emerging ways that you can get your message out, which I think is really important. I think that is changing the game a little bit about the way that we do things. But I think, I mean, specifically, Ian, if your question's coming back to independence and getting the message out for people for independence, when I was in the Yes campaign, and we had some really good materials that we were using, some of them didn't come from the Yes campaign. You might have an idea of what I'm talking about. And it's that way of giving people the information in a way that grabs their attention, that makes them think, they can rely on if they feel it's trustworthy, and they can have that conversation with other people around them. So I think it is about arming people with the right information, getting that out there. But I think the only way we're going to get independence is people talking to people. So we need to get as many people, like happened in 2014, talking to other people that they know, because that's what works. I think it's quite limited, you know, when you tap on doors, it's very unlikely you're going to convince somebody on the doorstep. People are usually drawn into this through conversations, you know, with their friends and family. I think that works really well. And people talking to other people, you know, their friends, their family, about issues that are important to them. That's how we're going to make this case. But it needs to be supported in the right way. So I think some of the problems we've had recently have been that, you know, the government and the First Minister, they're trying to do everything. You know, they're trying to lead the independence movement, they're trying to run the government, they're trying to focus on service delivery for the people of Scotland, make sure the NHS is working really well. That is a lot to put on one person. So I'm suggesting that we kind of break this up a bit, spread it out so that we've got more voices who can do more to get that message out there. So I've already talked about the Independence Convention. If you've got the best thinkers and all the other pro-independence parties, civic society, you know, they could be making the case for independence, and that's out of Parliament, you know, that's on the side in Scotland. And then I'm also going to suggest that we do a commission which will be tasked with getting Scotland ready. So then people can look at this and they can say, right, well, I was really worried about, let's say, currency, for an example. And we know that was a problem last time. But I can see the preparation is being made here, and I can see the progress because I'm getting updates. And I think that will neutralise some of the negative media, and it will build confidence in people, and they'll have that courage that they know the infrastructure is getting ready to get there. So that would be my plan for that.
Thank you. Hamza.
First of all, I think you should keep your applause going for Ian as part of the stewarding team. They do a brilliant job at conference, time and time again. So thanks, Ian, for all the great work that you do as part of the stewarding team. Problem with going last in all these questions is they've all done the good answers, you know. But I'm going to come in and give you my view on what I think we need to do. Look, as somebody who speaks to the media, if not every day, pretty much every day, we've got to make sure we are absolutely countering some of the drivel that comes from our opposition and often in some sections of the media too. And what do I mean by that? Well, I get told often about the challenges in the NHS, and there's challenges, but I often have to remind them about the facts. The facts, of course, that our NHS is the best performing anywhere in the UK. We have more GPs per head, more dentists per head, and of course the fact that we are continuing to be the only nation that doesn't have NHS strikes, which would have made those challenges far, far worse. So we've got to not only make sure we're rebutting and countering them as political leaders, as politicians, what we've got to make sure we do is arm you with the facts, not in a giant prospectus, not some opus that is hundreds and hundreds of pages long, as important and interesting as that will be to people. What we need to do is make sure you have the information, bite-sized chunks that you can take to the door. And to help us to do that, and I'm not being disparaging, I hope, about anybody, but we've got to reform headquarters. We've got to make sure it empowers you to be able to take that message to the door. I want to make sure in headquarters we have a properly staffed rebuttal unit. Their job is to make sure they counter some of that disinformation that comes from our opponents. I want to make sure that they are all over social media. Again, a good social media team, but we've got to beef that up. We've got to make sure headquarters is working for our branches right across the country, because it is going to be you, whoever is First Minister on this table, we will have a role to play, but it will be you, Ian, all of the activists here, that will have to take the message to the doorsteps. And where I slightly disagree with Ash is that I do think you win this on the doorsteps. I think you win it on the street stalls. I think you win it in the discussions that you have time and time and time again. So, yeah, get the information to you. We've got to make sure HQ is helping you to make sure that information is at your hand in bite-sized chunks to take to the doorstep. And we've got to make sure that we are talking about independence time and time again, not waiting for a date, not waiting for a process, but getting out there and talking to people. We do that, we get into the living rooms, almost quite literally, then we will win the argument for independence, because there is no fault in the argument. We've just got to get out there and we've got to make it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Can I make a point, boringly, that the presiding officer would make to you and used to make to me? Shorter answers will mean more questions, and I think that would be very helpful. Thank you, Ian, for your very brief question. I hope the panel will learn from you. Let's get another question here. Let's see. I'm going to also try and balance this, young and old, male and female, so we need to get some questions moving from women in the audience. Would any lady like to ask a question? Woman in the audience like to ask a question? Can't see a hand up as yet. Yes, there's a lady there. Please, on you go. Can you say who you are? There's a microphone coming for you. No, just here. Sorry, here. Here. If you can say who you are and then ask the question, and then we'll...
Okay, thank you. So I'm Fiona Leggett from the Adrian Shotts branch. I'm also a member of 2020 Together, which is a group of private nursery owners, and we want the best for Scotland's children. And I think, Kate, you used a really good phrase there. You know, it's their birthright for equal opportunity. And I would like to ask each and every one of you, and whom I know in particular you launched your sort of campaign on this, what are you going to do, any of you, for the rollout for 2s and under that will make it their birthright of equal opportunity? Because right now in Scotland, the children in PVI sector do not have equal opportunity. It's a policy, the 1140 policy was a good policy from Scottish Government. It was let down by local authorities. And what are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again?
We'll start with Ash this time, please, then Humza, then Kate.
So I think I remember, so my kids are older now, so I'm going back a while, so my stories might not be up to date. And so you can tell me if this is working now. But I felt like, you know, when you got the free government places, it was quite inflexible, and you weren't able to use it to like fill up a whole day or choose how you moved it around. So I think we need to look, I would like to be asking whether that's working well, and whether what we currently have is working well for people. And I would agree with you that in terms of equal opportunities, that is really important. And I think that I would like to see a system where kids actually go to school a little bit later, maybe 7. I think there's some really good evidence on perhaps changing to a slightly more of a kindergarten system. And I also think that sometimes we're in a position where we're designing policies and we're starting at the top and we're using consultants and we're coming up with these policies, we're announcing them, and then we're failing to get the implementation right on the ground. So I think that anything that we're doing and anything that we're rolling out, we've got to make sure that we're co-designing it with the frontline staff and the partners, because you mentioned the council there as well, to make sure that we can get this implementation right. Because it is a problem. We have got great policies, but more often than not, we have some slight issues with how we implement something, and then that can, create slightly a bit of a bad impression. So I think we need to be we need to be listening to people who are on the front lines and with the work that they're doing in order that we can get the services to be as good as possible.
Thank you. Humza?
Can I tell you, as a father of a 3-year-old, the best thing about nursery is messy play, because they get to do it at nursery and not at home. That is my favourite part of nursery, and Amal's favourite part of nursery, and my daughter's favourite part of nursery too. Can I say a couple of things? You're right, I launched my campaign really on this flagship policy that I want to do 2 things. One is provide a loan up front for the initial costs of childcare to every single parent, to help with those upfront initial costs. And it's a loan that won't have to be paid back until your child exits childcare. But I would say more substantial part of that policy was accelerating the expansion of childcare to 1 and 2-year-olds. And I believe in that policy wholeheartedly. And the reason why I believe in it so wholeheartedly is because for me, social solidarity and economic growth go hand in hand. If we can get parents, mainly women, back into work, then we can grow our economy. If we grow our economy, then of course we give people the quality of life that we want to all have and that we all aspire to have, and pay them fairly, and then they can withstand some of the shocks that we see in our economy. So the 2 go absolutely hand in hand. I made it very clear, I don't know if you saw this, Fiona, in the release that I put out, but I made it very clear that having engaged with the PVI sector, that we have to have an equitable funding formula. They don't feel it's equitable. We hear that time and time again. I heard it when I went to the nursery just yesterday too. So the first thing I would do, because I'm intending to, if I am First Minister, if I am the leader of the party, bring it in my first budget, so that would be in 24-25. The reason that gives us time to work with the PVI sector, to work with local authorities, and we have to nail down that fair funding formula, because they tell me if we don't, then a number of those in the sector will shut down. We can't have that. We need them to nurture our children in the best way possible, as they do now. So I'll give you an absolute commitment, an absolute guarantee that before that acceleration, I would enter personally into intensive discussions with the PVI sector, with local authorities, to make sure we get a funding formula that's fair, because all of us here want the best start for our children.
Kate?
Well, I don't know if you can see the bags under my eyes, because a little bit like Humza, I have a small little girl back at home who's 6 months old, and how I consider going back to work at the moment and figure out childcare is a challenge. So our nursery and childcare sectors are just critical. They are the backbone to our society, to our economy, enabling parents in particular to go back to work, but also so critical for their development as well. And there's 3 things I'd say about that. The first is that I think as a government, we have so often led the way when it comes to creative policies that put people first. So the policy is right. We need to make sure the implementation works. And implementation only ever works when you do it hand in hand with those who are on the front line. So when it comes to the NHS, that's our doctors and our nurses and our carers. When it comes to the nursery sector, it's people like yourself. It is our nursery workers who understand what's going on the ground. We need to listen, and we need to be nimble enough to adapt policies when those are required. And one of my priorities, obviously having been finance secretary for a number of years, is how we make sure that the money gets to the front line So the money doesn't get caught up in bureaucracy or conversations. It actually goes to the front line. So our young people are seeing the benefit of it. And I think that when it comes to the expansion of childcare, that policy is profoundly important, but we have a very mixed sector, and we need to make sure it's finding its way right to the front line. And perhaps there's been frustration, certainly in some local authority areas, with how that has been achieved. Can I say one last point, which is, this is another example of how we govern now in a competent way to persuade people of the benefits of independence. Because if this is what we can do with the limited powers of devolution, imagine what we can do as an independent country. Imagine what we could do if you look at Norway, some of the Scandinavian countries, where they have real wraparound childcare to enable parents, but perhaps particularly mums, to get back into the labour market.
I'm going to be looking for questions over this way. I'm going to try and keep it moving around the hall. So the first question I see up here is there, in the lady in the dark top. So there, with the microphone just coming to you, and question from you.
There, my name's Julie. I'm from Motherwell and Wishaw constituency branch. Will you, if elected, challenge Section 35, as it's a battle we can't afford to lose, but not one we can't afford to challenge? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we start with Hamza.
Let me be unequivocal about it. Let me make sure that you are hearing me absolutely clearly. We must challenge Section 35. We absolutely have to. I'll tell you why. Look, in this room, there's going to be a range of views about GRR. I accept that. On this panel, there's a range of views about GRR. I respect that. But this is about the principle of our democracy. If we cave in, if we roll over to a Westminster power grab, they will come after legislation after legislation after legislation. They're already threatening to do it time and time and time again. So if we cave in, but what kind of message would that send? What kind of message does that send to the Scottish people that we're not willing to stand up for devolution, let alone what would happen in an independent Scotland? And I know, we've got to take legal advice in any court case. We'll, of course, have to do that. But the starting principle, I would say, for any nationalist, the starting principle must be to defend Scotland's Parliament and defend Scotland's democracy. From me, I'm unapologetic, unequivocal. We must stand up to Westminster's power grab.
Kate.
I mean, we know that the UK government are on a mission. They are on a mission to dismantle the devolution settlement. They are on a mission with their muscular unionism to ensure that they hinder as much as possible the work that we are doing. And where I would agree with Hamza is that where legislation has been passed by the Scottish Parliament, that legislation should continue. We have seen this week alone the UK government also determining to cause problems with the deposit return scheme, and there's been a whole host of other issues. I think we need to act like we are, in many cases, an independent government, an independent country already. It's been well documented that there are differing views on the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. My views are probably well known, so I'm not going to go into them. And there are differing views on the panel. But a grown-up independent country sorts out its problems itself. It doesn't have to have recourse to another government, and nor does it need to ask permission from another government. It sorts those issues out themselves. And I think we can sort out the Gender Recognition Reform Act ourselves. I think we can track a course that recognises that it has become a very challenging, toxic debate and find a way forward that ensures that we do not stigmatise the trans community further and also give that security to women and girls when it comes to safe places. We can do that ourselves because one day we're going to be independent. And when we're independent, we're going to have to sort these things out ourselves. So yes, I would seek legal advice, but I'd far rather sort out the legislation ourselves without having to go to court or without having to seek Westminster's permission around what we do next.
Thank you. So I've got a bit of a different view on this. I think many of you will know that I am, I think, I was the first and the only SNP minister to ever resign on a point of policy. I think that we have really lost the trust of the country on the way that this was handled. Not the issue specifically, but the way I think that the issue was seen to be handled, that a range of views, were not being listened to. And so, no, I wouldn't challenge the Section 35, not because I think that it's okay for the UK to challenge our legislation, but for the simple reason that we're going to lose that court case. And we are going to be throwing probably hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money into something that the public, they don't support. So I think it's been quite a divisive issue in the Parliament as well. And I think that bringing it back to the Parliament and potentially opening it up again, which is another option, wouldn't be a good idea. So I think we need to draw a line on it in terms of the parliamentary sense. And the idea that I've had, which I think would possibly work in this situation, is if there's an appetite for re-looking at this issue, that I think this is the perfect thing for a citizens' assembly. Take it out of the Parliament, give it to the people, let them have a look at it and decide what's the appropriate way forward for it. So if I'm going to pick a fight with the UK government, I'm going to do it on something where the public are behind me.
Okay. Let me ask a question that's come from somebody in the audience who doesn't want to ask it because they don't want to be on camera. And it asks, and I'm going to start with Kate again here, who is your best friend in politics and why? You can't mention me, so you just get on with it.
Do you know that behind the scenes, in terms of best friend, that's quite difficult to pick one, particularly in a leadership contest. But there's a wee group of us that were all elected in 2016. And bear in mind, when you get elected for the first time, nobody gives you a handbook. You're just thrown into the deep end, expected to figure out how to vote, how to perform on camera, how to answer all the questions. And so there's a wee group of us that became friends in 2016 that in those early days supported one another. And I think there's a group, and I count Ash amongst that group of close friends whose advice and support I've immensely valued over the last 6 years when times get tough. And it feels like in the last 6 years, times have been tough more often than not.
Hamza.
Friends, who is my best friend in politics? My wife is a councillor. If I do not say her, then I am sleeping on one of your couches tonight. So my wife is, of course, my best friend in politics. Look, you know what? I count myself as a son of this party. My dad joined in 1974. I feel like I've been brought up in this SNP family, dysfunctional family at times, let's be honest, but a family nonetheless. And I just think that point that is made, that these next 4 weeks are going to be tough for all of us. There'll be ups and there'll be downs, emotional roller coasters. But look, we all have to make sure we get behind whoever ends up being elected as our party leader. In terms of around the cabinet table, I have to say one of the people that I'm closest to is John Swinney. Tough times in politics. I've been the victim of a lot of hatred in the past, and the first person who gets on the phone to check if I'm okay is John, who's been a great mentor, I think, probably to most of us, if not all of us, that have been in the cabinet and been in the government. So if I ever need that pep talk, I always give John a bit of a call. But my best friend, of course, is my wife, who's in the audience here today.
No need to repeat yourself on that. I have to. Ash.
Yes, I think that's the case in politics, that often when a group of people are elected at the same time, so in Kate and I's case, it's the 2016 intake, they tend to sort of coalesce together, and you tend to form your closest friendships from the people that were elected and went through the very overwhelming experience of getting elected for the first time at the same time as you. So yes, I would definitely consider Kate to be one of my pals, and we have a little group of people that we all sort of support each other. We go for the occasional glass of wine together to chat over the story, what's been happening in the Parliament of the day. So that would be people like Ruth Maguire, Gillian Martin, Claire Haughey, people like that. So they're my best pals at Parliament.
Good. Thank you. Right, I'm now looking for questions further up here. There, the gentleman in the blue there. Yes, that's fine, Robin. Just in there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Brennan. I'm a councillor in North Lanarkshire and a member of Hustings and Bellshill branch. I'd like to ask the candidates if it's genuinely possible for people of faith to rise to the highest rank in the party and to lead this country.
Okay, fine. We'll start with Ash.
I believe it is, and it should be. I think that's important. Obviously, we've got, on this panel here, we've got two, people who have strong religious views. And I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but I was actually really upset by the way that Kate was being treated by the media. It was last week. It feels like it's been quite a long time ago now, but I think it was just last week. So I've been defending her in the press, but I think it's really important that although we don't all share the same views, I think that's obvious, but we need to treat people who do hold views, people who are in a faith and have those views. I would defend their right to hold those views, even though I don't hold them myself. And I think, obviously, that everybody on this panel represents a sector of Scotland. We have people of all faiths in Scotland and people of no faith. So I grew up in probably quite an interesting situation. My parents are from Glasgow, and my mother was a Protestant, my dad was a Catholic, so it was fair to say that that was an interesting environment to grow up in the 70s and 80s in Scotland. So yes, I absolutely think it should be possible for people to rise to the top, even if they have a strong faith, yeah.
Kate.
Thanks. Well, I feel I've answered more questions on faith in a matter of days than most politicians will ever do in their lifetime. So, obviously, from my perspective, in the last few weeks, I've learned a lot. I recognise that there are things that I have phrased or framed that I could have done better, and I've been very clear about that last week. I do hope that in Scotland, our pluralistic and tolerant society can allow for people of faith to rise to the highest office. I hope too that we should hold our politicians to that high bar of being honest and open, so we know who they are and can then make an informed decision on that basis. And I think that's critical in any election context. And my position is obviously that in a pluralistic society, I hope that I can defend your right to the hilt to have a faith or to have no faith, and hopefully you can extend that same right to others who have faith or have no faith.
I think there's going to be vociferous agreement on this issue that a person of faith can not just aspire to the top job, but absolutely we can have a First Minister who is a person of faith. I count myself as a person of faith. I have to say Ramadan falls during the selection contest. That will be fun for me, but it's towards the latter few days, so I'll be participating in Ramadan. I've never hidden my faith. I'm very proud to be a Muslim and the first Muslim in the Scottish Government, the first Muslim in the Cabinet, and really proud of that fact. For me, it is about the basis by which you legislate. So I'm a proud Muslim. I'm proud of my faith. But for me, my faith hasn't been the basis of legislation, of how I make policy. Because what I've got to do as a legislator, what I've got to do as a policymaker, is not look at just what my personal faith is or what my religion says, but what is in the best interest of society as a whole. I've got to make sure I represent everybody. How do I make sure that the laws that I bring forward chime with what I think the country needs? And for me, it's really important that, yes, absolutely, we should all be upfront and honest about our views. And Kate, Ash, and I think have all been asked about these questions in the last week and all been upfront and honest about our views. But really, really important that two things. One, our job as leader of the SNP, whoever gets it, will be to grow support for independence. We have to grow support for independence. And it's so important that whoever is First Minister, that whether you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, whatever, whoever you are, that you can look the First Minister in the eye and you can have confidence that they will not only protect your rights, that they will not only tolerate you, but that they will celebrate you and that they will advance your rights where they possibly can. And secondly, so important for our cause that people absolutely believe that whoever the First Minister is will not just, as I say, tolerate, but celebrate the diversity of our country. And I think regardless of your faith, we should be able to do that. So yes, to answer your question, a person of faith can absolutely be in the top job. What I would say, though, is so important in order to grow our movement, that people have confidence that whoever it is, whatever their faith is, whatever their religion is, that their rights will not just be protected, but where necessary, advanced.
Yeah. Let me take a question somewhere in the middle here. Who is sitting in the middle that would like to ask a question? We've had left and right. We get some people from the middle now. Anybody here? Yes, a gentleman there. I can see his hand up. Can we get the microphone to you? Right in the middle of the hall. Wait till you get the microphone. And this is a question. So.
Right. Take my glasses off. To the candidates, would you be prepared to invoke...
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Would you be prepared to invoke our claim of right to self-determination under the international law at the UN on a 50% plus one vote if this is despite the fact that the Westminster have refused to play ball?
Okay, we've all heard that question. Hamza?
My view on the route to independence, and I just start where is that we have to make sure that we don't get bogged down in process in a second, but we don't get absolutely bogged down. The first thing we have to do is make sure we're persuading people so that we have that sustained support for independence. The second thing we have to do is make sure we've got a legal route to independence. Can I tell you now, having known Nicola for 15 years and worked alongside her in government for over 10 years, she is by a country mile the smartest person I know. And I think we would all agree in this room, the most formidable politician we've seen on these islands. If there was a quick ruse, if there was a quick way of getting our independence, trust me, Nicola absolutely would have found it. So I don't think that we should take any option off the table that is within a legal framework. I want to empower our membership. You are the custodians of our party. The leadership has to act on your collective mandate. So I want to set up in the first week these regional assemblies, not for a one-off conference where we drag you all to Edinburgh or Glasgow, but actually right across the country. Have a discussion, put every option on the table. I've told you in the media in the last week, I'm not wedded to this issue of a de facto referendum. I think there's advantages, I think there's actually some disadvantages of it too. But I want to hear from the membership, what is the determined path to independence? And if I am leader, will act on the mandate you give me. But it has to be, Jim, within a legal framework. Any suggestion that we can get, for example, 50% plus one, and then instruct the UK government to come up the road to begin negotiations. Listen, I've been a government minister for 10 years. When we need to get them on a phone call, they don't even bloody come on the phone, right? Let alone telling them to come up the road and demanding that they take part in negotiations. So whatever options there are, I've seen, Tommy Shepherd's written some great stuff on the claim of right. You might have seen it. For anybody that hasn't, please go away and look at it. All options on the table that are within a legal framework. Let's discuss it. Let's do the regional assemblies and make sure that the leadership takes our instruction from the membership.
Ash?
So, Jim, I don't think that's the right approach. So what I've set out is the voter empowerment mechanism, which is basically using each and every election for the next wee while until we reach that trigger for independence, and we use that as the moral imperative for the UK government and to open negotiations and talk to them about that. And the reason I'm saying this, and I probably wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but we have to respond to the situation that we're in. So we've obviously been winning election after election. We're like piling up mandates. We're going cap in hand to the UK government and we're begging for a referendum. And obviously they're saying, no, you're not going to have a referendum. But that's obviously part of their strategy, because their strategy at the moment is to stop Scotland expressing its will. So once we move that back, we give the power back to the people of Scotland, and we let them express their will when they're ready to vote for it, then I do believe that they will have an imperative to listen to that. And it also allows us to concentrate on government. We're putting it back to the Scottish people. We can stop talking about referendums. We can stop talking about the process of how we get there. It's just happening in the background, and the Scottish people will be watching us, preparing for independence. They'll gain more confidence and courage. They'll feel safe that they can vote for it. And when they do that, we can open negotiations. And there's a number of ways we can put pressure on the UK government. So I'm just suggesting this as a response to the position that we're in now. It's democratic, and it will allow Scotland to express their will when they're ready. And I give you my word that I will exert maximum pressure to get the UK government to come to the table to negotiate.
Thanks. So my view on this is that my ambition for independence is much bigger than 50+1. I strongly believe that independence is inevitable. I think Scotland will be an independent country. I think my daughter will grow up in an independent country. But I think we should be maximising the support for independence. And we do that through a number of ways. We do that through competent government, competent leadership. We also do that by using each and every opportunity to make the case for independence when it comes to elections. And in terms of the route to independence, I think if we ensure that we are maximising that support, we are laying out a clear route map for how Scotland can be wealthier and fairer through independence, we'll persuade people. The question you're asking then is about process. But I think the process question comes after that first element. In terms of process, what I said in my opening remarks, but perhaps bears repeating now, is that we set out an independence delivery plan. The focus is to maximise support, but we will also put that to the people in the next Westminster election 2024, which is not that long away. You know, that's next year. And in that plan, we will put, or in that election rather, we will put independence front and centre, and we will look for a mandate to ensure that the legal powers to hold a referendum be transferred within 3 months. And that's the approach that we take. But that approach, any process, will only be successful if we are maximising the support for independence. And we maximise that support through good governance, a growing, thriving economy, a mission to eradicate poverty, and demonstrating that Scotland's better days are ahead with independence and not without.
Thank you. Right. I should tell people we're likely to take 4 or 5 more questions now, given the time. So if you're hanging back, don't. I'll take the gentleman in white at the back.
Hi, hi, Cal Johnson Dempsey, Hustings and Bellshill branch, also a South Lanarkshire councillor. To ask the candidates what plans they would have or ideas to bring an alternative to council tax, to further localise local government, or any other plans to reform or further empower local government.
Okay, a local government question, Kate?
Yeah. So, I think this is part of the argument for independence. We have got to decentralise power further. We've got to ensure that when it comes to our public services, those on the front line are making the decisions, and that comes to local government. So if elected leader, I would be looking at maximising the powers for local government. That includes reviewing all ring fencing so that you can make the decisions that are in the best interests of your local communities, and ensuring that we have a whole government approach, a whole party approach of empowerment and decentralisation. I think it is challenging to make the argument for greater independence if we're not willing to pass on that power. So that includes SNP members, it includes the party, but it does also include local government. Because at the moment, I think local government is, or at least some of the powers are too centralised, and I guess we're speaking in budget season where budgets are being set, And it's challenging across the board when it comes to budgets because of inflation, cost of living, and the pressures. But ultimately, I reckon a carer on the front line knows how to support a family better than a civil servant somewhere in an office in Edinburgh. So the more we can decentralise and empower, the better. And we've got to do that.
Yeah, I think we could be looking at council tax. I think that, it's been in place for quite a long time now, and I think we all know it doesn't work quite as well as it could. So I think there might be options for perhaps making that more progressive. So keep that system and possibly make it more progressive. But there are other options. We don't have to have council tax. We could look at other options. So one of the other options obviously would be land tax. So that's a totally different way of doing things. So I think that's something that as a party we could be discussing and thinking about whether that's something we want to do. I also think that councils would probably welcome the idea that we look again at ring fencing to see if there's something we can do on that, because I know sometimes that makes them feel that they're a bit constrained in the decisions that they can make locally. And I think that we could be also generating perhaps more funding at an even lower level. So there might be opportunities that we could develop money or raise money rather through additional means that could be funded straight into communities at a very, very local level, so that they could decide exactly what priorities they had for their local area. And I think that's something that we should be looking at as well.
Thank you.
So apparently my mic is not working, so I'm hoping you can hear me fine. I won't break this one, just as I broke this one. But listen, thanks so much for the question. Was the name Tam? Callum. I got you. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear you because the mic. For me, a couple of things. First of all, in our party, we have an extraordinary array of talent, right? Whether it's, I've been with pride when I watch PMQs and see Stephen Flynn tearing strips off Rishi Sunak. Whether it's in our Scottish Parliament, where we've got exceptional talent, and in local government, where you're on the front line. I'm not just saying this because my wife is a councillor. When you are on the front line taking really difficult decisions, we have so much talent. And again, as much as I absolutely admire and respect Nicola, she said herself actually during her resignation statement that being such a dominant political force, sometimes you don't see that talent come to the fore. So if I am elected as the SNP leader, I want to harness all of that talent, particularly those hundreds of councillors that we've got at local government level. And this may seem like a very internal kind of techie point that I'm making, but I think it's an important one. So for example, when we do political cabinet and have those really strategic, high-level political discussions, I'm not just going to have MSPs and MPs there. I want to invite local government leaders to come to political cabinet regularly. So we hear from them on the ground. What is going on? Where do we need to strategize? What's the next moves that are going to be made? And I hope that if I am leader, what you'll see from a local government perspective is a team SNP approach. Look, I speak to many councillors and council leaders, and they feel, even in our own party, that the conversation could be more collegiate. They feel that sometimes things are done to them. And I want to make sure that actually they are part of the team informing the discussions from the grassroots to national government. So I'm absolutely committed to that. I'm committed to a new deal for local government. We should look at both the funding and the funding mechanisms for sure. And absolutely we need to grab the bull by the horns on council tax reform. That's something that is, let's be frank, taken us far too long. So we need to absolutely make sure we make progress with that. But let me just end, I suppose, where I started. We have huge amounts of talent. If whoever is the party leader, we need to harness that talent. If we do that, we win independence. And that is not just a job for MSPs and MPs, it's a job for the wider membership and our friends and colleagues in local government too.
Thank you. Lady at the back there who has jumped out of her seat, so desperate as she is to ask a question, please. I couldn't possibly say no. You're almost in the row in front of you.
Thank you. My name is Mary Gray. I'm a member of East Kilbride Branch and I'm also a councillor for South Lanarkshire Council.
You just... No, it's not working.
It's not just me that broke the mic.
There's another one coming over to you. Don't break this one.
Right, that's better. I'd just like to ask the panel regarding buffer zones outside clinics. Do they intend to pursue that issue? Because it's worrying about vulnerable women and nurses who are being harassed by protesters. I do appreciate everyone has the right to protest, but my daughter works in a hospital and she's also one of the people being harassed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ash?
Yes, I do. I've seen some of the scenes of that, and I know it isn't always like this, but there was a couple of occasions, I think it was in the summer last year, where it seemed to be it was escalating, and it seemed to be getting very heated. And rather than just maybe people standing with placards or whatever, it was getting quite aggressive. And I know that the staff and some of the women who were going in to access healthcare were really feeling that they were running the gauntlet, you know, at a time when, you know, they didn't need to be being put under additional sort of emotional distress and pressure. So at the moment in the Scottish Parliament, there's a members' bill that's been, you probably know this, but I'll give the benefit of other people that maybe aren't up to speed on this one. There's a members' bill that's been put in for exactly this, for buffer zones. It's been put forward by a member of the Green Party. I'm not exactly sure what parliamentary stage it's at yet. I don't think it's past stage 1 yet, but it's in the process of being brought forward. And I will certainly support that bill, yes.
Right. Hamza?
Yes, I absolutely support safe access zones. No ifs, no buts, no maybes about it. Look, as Health Secretary, let me be clear. The access to abortion is a healthcare issue. It's a healthcare right. It actually still stuns me that it's part of the criminal law at the moment, and there's been an ask about whether we should look to decriminalise it, and I think that's a conversation that not only we should explore, but we should explore with some level of urgency. This is about women's rights to access healthcare. I've told you already in the course of this conversation that I'm somebody of faith. I pray, but I pray at home and I pray in a mosque. I don't think about going outside an abortion clinic where women, our mothers, our daughters, our nieces, some of them will be having the most traumatic day of their lives. Even if people are sitting there silent, they don't need that silent judgment. They don't need that intimidation. They don't need harassment. They don't need that on a day that is already unbelievably difficult for them. So I'm going to support Gillian Mackay's bill wholeheartedly. But also I think we should be looking at what more we can do to make access to women's healthcare, including access to abortions, as accessible as we possibly can. So no ifs, no buts. We have to get safe access zones, and it's been done in some parts of England, as you know. We've got to get it done here in Scotland too.
As a young woman, I can't imagine the fear, the anxiety, the stress of going for a termination, and no woman does that lightly. I think they should be allowed to do that without fear, intimidation and harassment. And I've been very clear that I'm willing to work with Gillian Mackay to ensure that that bill works and that it's balanced. In terms of Ash's point, in terms of what point it's at, as I understand it, it's gone out for consultation, and at the moment the consultation responses are being reviewed with a view to Gillian Mackay introducing, I believe, the bill after that. And certainly as First Minister, I'd be happy to work with her on that to achieve the bill's aims.
Now, further questions. I'll take the gentleman here in the orange jacket. I'm sorry, if I know people, I'm not giving their names, it's just I can't quite see them properly, so my apologies. Gentleman in the orange jacket.
Hi, I'm William from the Airdrie branch. Undoubtedly, the person here tonight who replaces Nicola will have very big, maybe very small shoes to fill. But in doing that, they'll have to be a brave leader, because I have a hard act to follow. What is the bravest thing you've done in politics?
Well. So you get to start on that one?
One of the scariest things, I don't know if bravest is the right word, that I did in politics. A couple of things maybe that come to mind. First of all, when it came to the trade union negotiations on fair pay. One of the bravest things I think I did was really go into a room with the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister and plead the case for more money for the NHS at a time when, of course, budgets were exceptionally difficult. And having a discussion with John about that, given how difficult the financial picture was, there was let's say it was a robust discussion with John. And in fairness to him, he, of course, came forward with the money. But one of the, I suppose, bravest things, and I don't know if it's bravery or if it's foolhardy, I've always stood up against hatred, regardless of who it's towards, whether it's the Jewish community, whether it's the LGBT community, whether it's the Muslim community, Christian, whoever it is. And that's often come at quite a big personal cost. You know, I have to talk to my 13-year-old daughter about carrying a panic alarm. You know, I have to have additional security in my house. But I give you a promise that if I'm First Minister, if I'm leader of this party, regardless of the threats or the abuse, I would suggest you don't search my name on Twitter because that's a pretty nasty place indeed. But if I am First Minister, then I promise you that those brave decisions, those difficult things that have to be said, standing up for people's rights, even if it's unpopular, is something I promise to do time and time and time again.
Great. Thanks. So I'm a wee woman. I stretch it to 5'3", I'm probably 5'2". I was elected at quite a young age, and probably the bravest thing I've done is in those early days of going for election, going in front of about 200 to 250 people, stuffed into a tiny village hall in the middle of nowhere, who all hated me and hated decisions that we'd made in terms of the local community. And it was full of hecklers, full of people that were just really cheesed off. And there was little old me at the front trying to manage a crowd of 250 people. And there was one guy, a pretty big guy, who kept heckling me. And I thought, this is going to get out of hand. So I said, excuse me, sir, if you've got something to say, come forward and say it from the front. And his wife nudged him and said, shut up. And that was that. So.
Good.
Yeah, so I've mentioned it earlier, but I'm the only SNP minister to ever resign on a point of policy, and that doesn't sound like a big deal. But obviously, we are all in a team. We are all instructed to vote in a certain way on most issues. We sometimes get free votes for issues of conscience. And I had actually argued at the SNP group meeting that for the gender recognition reform, that in my mind met that test of being something that was a conscience issue, and that perhaps they should consider making that a free vote. And they didn't do that. It wasn't just me that argued for that, it was a number of others as well. And obviously, because I was a minister, I was more constrained. Ministers are bound by something called collective responsibility. So if the government takes a decision on something, all the ministers are bound to support and defend that policy in public, even if they, and especially if perhaps they don't agree with that policy themselves. So I knew this vote was coming up. I knew it was coming up from a while ago, and I had time to think about what I wanted to do. And I spent time researching the topic, talking to people, trying to get a handle on where I think things weren't quite right. But we got to the point a few days before. I was speaking to representatives of Nicola Sturgeon, sort of laying out my position, explaining to them that this was a red line issue for me and I couldn't vote for it. And in the end, I obviously sent my resignation letter in on the day of the stage 1 vote, because I was told that I had to attend and I had to vote for it, and obviously I couldn't do that. So I resigned my position in the government. I didn't want to resign. I felt like I was doing some really good work in justice, especially for women in the justice system. I wanted to continue to do that, but I felt that this was important for me, and I had to, in that case, stand up for what I believed was right. So there was a number of the members of the SNP that didn't vote for it, and it's quite rare in government for someone to do something like that, and it obviously does come at a personal cost to yourself. And I think that it's important for leaders to be able to take that stand, to stand up for what they think is right, even if there's a personal cost involved in it, even if there's no one at your back supporting you. And so when I stood up in the chamber to give my stage 3 speech on this, knowing that a lot of my colleagues didn't agree with what I was saying, I was proud to do it, because I knew from speaking to people that I was giving voice to the concerns of many women and girls in Scotland who felt a bit shut out of that process.
Thank you. Now I'm looking for questions still. Take a gentleman just here in the front row, and then we'll have time for 2 or 3 more after that.
Hi, Callum from Falkirk North. I was just thinking about the cost of living crisis and some campaign pledges we made. So one of them was to dual the A9, which I know has been mentioned a little bit in the leadership race, at a cost of, I think it's about £120 million. And the only bid that we've had in on that was going to bring us significantly over budget on that. And that's money that would come from healthcare or local government or whatever. So what I wanted to ask was, when it comes to delivering on campaign pledges compared to finding, how am I supposed to word this? Delivering on campaign pledges compared to getting good value for money, essentially. Where would you sort of draw that line, I suppose?
Thank you very much. Kate.
So we have got to respond immediately to the challenges that are unfolding. So we're having this election contest, it's important, but right now my constituents, your neighbours, are really struggling. They don't know how to afford next month's energy bills, never mind this month's energy bills. Their wages are being eaten away by inflation. The costs are rising, the income is decreasing, and the pressure and the worry is enormous. You don't need the polls to tell you that, but the polls are saying that the cost of living in the NHS is up there in terms of issues that people are concerned about. Now, in a small country, governments can be nimble enough, quick enough to try and plug a gap and try and respond. The difficulty we face is we're always doing it with one hand tied behind our back. So we can't generate funding really quickly. We do have to redeploy funding, and we have to ensure that we're meeting a need, particularly challenging when energy is reserved. So I think as a government, we have got to show that responsiveness to what people need. But I also believe in government that's efficient and effective, ensuring that money goes into people's pockets and doesn't get stuck in bureaucratic processes and conversations, not actually meeting the need. So that's where actually working closely with local government. We've done this already during COVID, where we managed to get money out the door quickly and into people's pockets. We can do it as a country. We need to do it again. I do have a vested interest, though, in making sure that we have infrastructure that's fit for purpose. Because when it comes to the A9 isn't just a campaign pledge. The A9 has seen more fatalities last year than many other roads, way too many fatalities. The A9 needs dualled. It needs dualled quickly to save lives, apart from anything else.
Hamza?
Can I say on cost of living, because that's, I think, where you started your question. I'm sure all of us will lay out in the coming days and weeks what we'll try to do to combat the cost of living crisis, and I'll certainly give detail of that. And we've got a job to do in government to make sure we use every single power and every single lever at our hand to help our fellow Scots who are suffering day in and day out because of that Tory cost of living crisis. We should also make sure we do not let Westminster off the hook. You know, they are underspending their energy price guarantee funding by billions. And they're still going to push ahead with an energy price rise in April that will cause further devastation to people. So let's make sure we're absolutely not letting them off the hook. And going back, I suppose, to Ian's very first question, let's make sure we're challenging that in the media time and time again. An energy price rise should not be inevitable. It absolutely shouldn't happen. In terms of the A9, absolute commitment to dual it. But I go back to this point that good governance is one of the reasons why people have supported us and those in government who have shown that competence, have shown that leadership for years and years, and I've been proud to be part of the government for over 10 and a half years. It is because of competent, good governance that we have managed to get to where we've got to. Now, as Transport Minister, I've delivered a number of roads projects, a number of new rail projects. The Queen oversaw the Queensferry crossing too. And what I would say is that if we pay through the nose, if we pay exorbitant amounts of money, I'm telling you now the opposition would be the first ones to drag us over the coals and ask us why we were spending that kind of money. So we have got to make sure that we are doing right by the public purse, because every single penny should be going into supporting our fellow Scots where we can. But we have got to also, for the reasons that have already been mentioned, for the safety, of course, for the importance of transport and accessibility to the north of Scotland in particular, we have to make sure we're demonstrating urgency when it comes to dealing with the A9. So one of the first things I would like to do if I am elected as First Minister is make sure that we have a team not just absolutely committed, who are committed to working on this, but bring forward with urgency to the communities along the A9 a plan of how we will push that forward. Of course, understanding that our responsibility, the public purse, has to come first. But the commitment to the dualling the A9 has got so much support that we have to make sure that people are in no doubt whatsoever that we are going to retain that commitment.
Yeah, so I think cost of living crisis is obviously, it's one of the main things we're facing right now, I think, or we should be facing in the Scottish Parliament. The people outside of the Scottish Parliament are really struggling. You know, they have a lot of them have a fixed amount coming in, and they are just looking at all their costs going up. So whether that's, you know, their mortgage is going up, their rent is going up, their food bill is obviously rising dramatically, and energy costs are obviously right at the top of that list. I'm sure that the way this has been handled by the UK government is actually going to lead to some people losing their homes because it's so bad that they just can't pay their energy bills. It is absolutely unacceptable that we're in this situation. Now, obviously, that's the UK, that's how they've set up the energy market, and many of you will no doubt know that, you know, other European countries have not inflicted this on their population. You know, they've capped it, they've kept it really low, they've done lots of different things, obviously they're able to do as independent countries, and the UK has not. I mean, they've done some tinkering, but they have not stepped up to this challenge. That energy market in the UK needs a complete rearrangement. Now, do I think that the UK government's going to rearrange the energy market anytime soon? No, I don't. So I think that we will need to look into what we can do as a, you know, under devolution to see if there's more that we can do. And we know that obviously we're generating a lot of clean, renewable energy in Scotland, and yet we're paying more to use energy. So it's not good. So I'm wondering if there's things that we could be looking at in terms of re-looking at the energy company, for instance, that we've talked about before, but perhaps bring generation of energy into that. So I think that's something that I would be immediately looking at to see if there's something we could do there. But regard to the A9, I agree with you. We can't spend unlimited sums completing public projects. I think there might be something there in the way that we're putting that out to tender, and I wonder if it can be broken down into much smaller chunks. More smaller and local companies would be able to bid for that work, and it might mean that we're able to progress that more quickly and on budget. I think it is important that we uphold our manifesto commitments. You know, you damage trust with people if you promise them something and promise them it, and then you say you can't follow through on it. People are dying on that road on a regular basis, so it does need to be done. And also, you know, the North East is one of the economic powerhouses of Scotland. We want to support that. We want people in, whether it's in oil and gas, whether it's in renewables, those sort of technologies and the supply chain for that to be able to travel around quickly, because that supports businesses, and businesses support well-paid jobs. So we still need to look at our infrastructure. It is very important.
Right. There's a lady there, I can see, with a hand up. My colour sensors are going, but I think it's pink. Yes, you're the one. Absolutely, on you go. Yep. And hope the microphone works for you.
Hi there, I'm Eve Cunnington. I'm from the Hustings and Bellshill branch. So this isn't a big national issue, and it might be a bit of a niche one, but it's something quite important to me. I was a young carer from the age of 10, and I am so appreciative of the efforts the Scottish Government's gone to help care experienced young people. But many young carers experience similar roadblocks like poor job prospects and education prospects and lack of sort of experience going into adulthood. And they're also transitioning to becoming adult carers as well. So I just want to know what kind of commitment you would give if you were elected as First Minister to young carers across Scotland.
Yeah, I think that the job that young carers are doing is such an amazing thing that they're doing for their family members, that they're wanting to provide that care for them. It's really inspirational that people are doing that. In terms of people that are care experienced as well, obviously we had the promise I remember being at a conference, actually, I can't remember which one it was, I don't know if anyone else was there, when Nicola was talking particularly about this and about care experienced young people and her promise to do more and to do better, and everyone holding up, I think it was Love Hearts. It was a genuinely moving moment in politics. So I know that work's ongoing on that, but I would like to talk to people. I think I really want to get across tonight to people that I am the kind of person that works with lots of people. I don't always just listen to people that agree with me. I like to listen to everybody about lots of topics. And I really think it's important that as a government, we listen to people. I said it earlier on, but we listen to people on the front line. So whether that's the staff that are working in our NHS, whether that's young carers, people that are care experienced, people that are working in the care sector, maybe going in to see elderly people a few times a day and being that only face that somebody sees from one week to the next. It's really important that we listen to what those people have to say, because I can pretty much guarantee that they've got something to tell us that will help to make our system work better. So I'm listening, and I want everyone to come and talk to me and tell me how we can make Scotland better.
Thanks very much. Well, I don't think that's a niche area at all. I think that is absolutely critical when it comes to building the kind of country we want to live in. And again, going back to the fact we're a small country, we're small enough to be able to listen to those who have the direct experience and build policy around those with the direct lived experience. I am so opposed to policies being developed by civil servants, wonderful though they are, in offices in Edinburgh, far removed. I'd far rather it was built from the grassroots, as it were, up. And I think when it comes to care in particular and young carers, too often the support that we provide is too rigid. So there's your help, take it or leave it. And actually the kind of help that individuals need, families need, is going to differ from person to person. Some people just need a break. They need a breather. They need to get out of the house and get their hair cut, or they need to go on a, go on a holiday, or they need to get additional support in the house. And that support needs to be adapted and needs to be flexible for each family and for each carer. You also talked just about jobs and housing, and that's the same. It can't be a case of one policy fits all. It has to be policies that are flexible enough to adapt. And if I could go back to one other principle that I've been talking about tonight, it is that those on the front line know how to do this better than anyone else. So if we empower them, we give them the freedom, in a small country, we can do this and we can do it well.
Thank you.
Eve, can I thank you for asking the question. I agree, it's not a niche issue at all, and I'm really applaud the fact that you've put your head above the parapet and talked about your own experience too. What I would say is that I would hope whoever is the leader of the SNP and the next First Minister continues Nicola's legacy around the promise. We have to commit to the promise. We have to see it through. Otherwise, why should any young person, any person, trust another politician again? We made a promise to our young people, and they have to really believe from our heart. They have to believe that we are going to fulfill that very promise. And I believe that more and more people will be persuaded by our case for independence if they see that with the limited powers of devolution, that we are a country, a nation, our values are such that we leave no person behind, and especially no young person behind. And that is at the very heart of the promise. Some of the statistics around care experience young people are frightening. When I was Justice Secretary, you would look at the number of young people who'd been through the care system who were in Pullman. It was, I'm afraid, it was a stain in our conscience that so many people had been failed and ended up in the justice system. So we've got to take as the promise does, take a holistic approach right throughout a young person's life and make sure if they're a young carer, if they're care experienced, make sure that they are getting that wraparound holistic support through their home life, through their education, through their employment, through training, through their social life, whatever they need. We need to make sure that we are not failing the young people of this country. If we show that with the limited powers of devolution, we will show exactly the type of independent nation we want to build. One that is rooted in social justice and, again, puts our young people at the heart of everything we do.
Thank you. Right, we're getting very close to the end. I think we probably managed to squeeze in 2 questions, so I'm just going to take, there is another person who is absolutely throwing themselves out of their seat, so I'm going to take this lady here, and then I'll just take one more. I'm glad it was a popular choice.
Anticlimax now. My name's Katrina Farrell. I'm from the Cumbernauld branch and I'm a NHS hospital consultant. So my question for the candidates would be, if elected as SNP leader and First Minister, what would your priorities be for the Scottish NHS?
Cool. And this is totally random, but Humza is actually due to answer first now. So Humza, and then Ash, and then Kate.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for the work that you do and you have done over the last, number of years. I suspect the last 3 years in particular have been the most exhausting and relentless of your entire professional career, and I'm genuinely grateful. But I don't just want to give you warm plaudits and warm words, because they're pretty easy for candidates and politicians to do. I want to make sure we put our money where our mouth is. And that's why 2 things. One is that we have to make sure our staff are well paid and properly paid. We are facing significant recruitment challenges, but also retention challenges. No point filling up a leaky bucket. You can recruit and recruit and recruit, but if people are falling out the other side, we're not keeping them, that's not going to make an iota of difference. So I'm working with the likes of the BMA, Royal College of GPs, others, to see what more we can do around retention. Some of that is in our gift. So we've been able to, for example, I've instructed NHS boards to bring forward a recycling employers contribution scheme, a REC scheme, which hopefully begins to deal with some of the disincentives that exist in the pension system. Some of those are in our gift, some of them, of course, in the UK government's gift. So workforce, 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 paying them well, recruiting and retaining has to be at the heart of it. The second thing I would say is we have to reform what we do and what we do in the NHS. Now, the founding principle of the NHS is never up for grabs, not up for debate. There's nobody in this room, and I think very, very few people in the Scottish public that disagree with that. But we've got to look at how we reform the NHS. What do I mean by that? I mean, we've got to treat as many people at home and as close to home as we possibly can. And social care and investment in social care is at the heart of that. If we have social care that has the right workforce, that is working for people, then we stop them coming in the front door of the hospitals or indeed in the GP practices. And of course, in the exit block, we get them back out the door, back home where they should be, or as close to home as we possibly can. So reform healthcare and social care has to be at the heart of it, and that's why I'm unapologetic about my support for the National Care Service. Absolutely up for a discussion about rephasing and where we can find some compromise, particularly with local government and trade unions, but the principle of the National Care Service, where we have fair pay for our social care workers, where we have national collective sectoral bargaining, where we have ethical commissioning, these will solidify a social care system, a national social care system that is worthy of the name.
Yeah, so I've been out speaking to people already about this, and I was talking to a midwife on Saturday, and she was talking to me for quite a long time, and she was basically laying out in front of me basically what she felt was the completely untenable situation that staff are being put in our NHS right now, and how she felt that she was, and many of her colleagues felt that they were quite close to breaking point and they just couldn't go on in the way that they were right now. So I think that if we don't change, I don't think we're going to get this back on track where it needs to be. And I don't think managers are going to fix the problems that we've got in the NHS. I think the staff will fix the problems that we've got in our NHS right now. So I'm favouring a staff-first approach. And what I would do is have a national summit. So I'd like to invite the staff in every health board to nominate some people to come along from every discipline and come to this national summit and talk to me, if I'm First Minister, to tell me about what needs to change, and then we'll look at doing it. So I think we need to support our staff. I think we need to free them up from some of the bureaucracy. that they've been forced into, that's taking up a lot of their time and putting pressure on them. I think sometimes politicians think that the way to fix this is, something isn't doing very well, so we'll just set another target and that will divert attention. And I think it does to an extent, but then we develop problems in other areas, and more targets isn't going to fix the problem that we've got here. We need to stop, take a breath, we need to engage with the frontline staff, and we need to change things, but in co-design with the staff. The staff are what is going to turn this round for us. Only they can help us to move forward on this.
Thanks. I think we could probably dedicate a 2-hour hustings just to discussing the NHS. So I've tried to group my thoughts into sort of 3 categories. And the first is that we have got to have a very serious conversation about reform to the NHS that is led by practitioners, that is led by nurses, doctors and carers. Because my fear at the moment, and again based on talking to nurses and doctors, is that we are not empowering those on the front line sufficiently. They are overworked, they are exhausted, and at the moment when it comes to funding, too much of the funding gets caught up in bureaucracy and management rather than making its way to the front line. So we need to ensure that that funding is going to the front line. Secondly, the care sector is critical when it comes to reform of the NHS. There is no reform of the NHS without a plan for care. And I'm very supportive of the National Care Service. I think it's a huge opportunity for Scotland. But I think it has to achieve its aims. And those aims need to be dignifying the care sector, putting fair work at its heart, ensuring that there are learning pathways, apprenticeship models, so that care is an attractive place to work, and that we reward our carers when it comes to fair work. Because there's no answer to delayed discharge, which is absorbing funding that could otherwise be going on frontline care, if we don't ensure that there are care packages. And ultimately, what is the care sector if it isn't carers? It is people, first and foremost. So that's the second element, and I set out some thoughts about that today. My last point is around recruitment. It's a lot easier to retain staff who are perhaps studying in Scotland, and we need to look carefully at the caps at university level, where too many would-be doctors and nurses are not getting into Scottish universities. I think if we can open that cap further and ensure that it's, as it were, homegrown talent that we are training and then retaining in Scotland, they're not going to Australia, going elsewhere, we have that big pool of talent that stays here, then we also will start to deal with that. So those are just 3 very quick areas, but as I said, we could do this for 2 hours. That's where I'd start.
Now, I'm going to take a final question, and the candidates can use it as a final roundup if they want, but I want them to be as brief as possible on that. So I'm looking for that final question that's going to sum up the whole evening. Who's got that? No pressure on you at all, of course. Who's got that final question? Anybody going to do it? Well, there are some volunteers, right? I'm going to take that one right in the middle there again, partly because the person next to him is pushing him to put his arm up. So please, on you go. Wait, we'll get the microphone into you. This had better be good.
You've got me sweating now. Jamie from died. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, Jamie from Stirling, my convener Susan's the one haranguing me beside me. Northern Ireland's just won a watch. They're in the single market now. They're in the EU single market. They're still part of the UK, and now they're direct competition to Scotland. So, I'd like to know the leader's response to that. Are we going to ask for a similar arrangement with the UK government before we become independent, or are we going to sit on our hands?
Good. Kate.
Well, that's an excellent question to allow me to sum up, because ultimately we want to use examples to demonstrate to the people of Scotland how we can be wealthier, fairer, and I think Northern Ireland demonstrates the value of being in the world's largest single market and having good trade relations with its nearest neighbour. And if Northern Ireland can do it, then why can't Scotland? We absolutely can. But But I believe, and that's what I'm standing for here, I believe that Scotland has all that it takes to be wealthier, fairer and more prosperous. We've got the industries, we've got the small businesses, we've got the talent. We need to harness that so that Scotland's economy is growing and prospering. There is no reason why Scotland cannot be one of the wealthiest countries in the world, not as an end in itself, but so that we can eradicate the blight that is poverty. That in a country as wealthy as ours, there are too many children living in poverty, and we must end that. Not an end in itself, because we also need to raise the tax revenue to reinvest in our public services. So I imagine all of us are agreed that we need to eradicate poverty, we need to invest in our public services so that they're free at the point of use. We do that through a growing economy, and we ultimately do that through independence.
Ash.
Yes, obviously Scotland voted resoundingly to stay in the EU in the Brexit vote, and the UK government didn't offer Scotland a deal like the one they gave to Northern Ireland, and I think we all know why that was. So we could certainly ask the UK government for that, but I don't think that would be forthcoming. So I think we need to take matters into our own hands, and my view on this is that whilst many of us may want to be back in the EU, I think in the short term at least, accession to the EU could turn out to be a very long process. It could be 10 years or more. So I think in terms of strategy, we need to think about the short term. And so I think EFTA could be a good solution for Scotland. It would obviously give us control over our fishing, our agricultural policy, and it also allows us to prioritise economic trade and protect the security of the country. And it will also give us a better bargaining position when we get to the independence negotiations. And it's also something that can be done very quickly as well. So you can get in there quite quickly. I think even really within a matter of months, that might be an option. So that's something I think we should definitely be looking at. But in terms of summing up for you all this evening, thanks very much for coming along to listen to us. And I hope you've had a chance to have a think about all the candidates. But just to remind you that I'm the only candidate that's got a plan for independence. I've shown already that I'm a courageous politician and that I'm willing to stand up for what I believe in. I'm already uniting the Yes movement and reigniting support for independence, and us all working together towards that aim. And I also want to refocus on the priorities of the people of Scotland, and that is on things like the NHS and the cost of living crisis, through marrying up good governance with that trigger support for Scottish independence. Thank you.
Jamie, well, two things I would say, well, three things actually I would say. First of all, we shouldn't be asking for that, we should be demanding that, as Stephen Flynn was quite rightly doing at Westminster today. You know, the other thing we should do, this goes back to, again, I keep going back to Ian Murray's excellent first opening question, but it goes back to his question about information and disinformation. We should make sure that clip of Rishi Sunak extolling the virtues of, wow, what a brilliant idea, Rishi. You know, great idea. You can have access to the UK market and access to the single market, which is 7 times the size of the UK market. We should make sure that is in every single living room. We should make sure that is in everybody's mobile phone. They are flooded with that clip time and time and time again, because it makes the argument for us. How dare they stop us from having what Northern Ireland has when our people voted resoundingly to stay within the European Union. What I'd say also is we cannot stop reminding people about the harm Brexit has done. Remember, it was Michael Gove, I think, or possibly Boris Johnson, Tweedledum, Tweedledee, it was one of them anyway, that said that negotiating a treaty to leave the EU would be done in a matter of days, matter of weeks. It would be the easiest treaty ever done in the history of treaties. David Davis, thank you. I don't know, it was one of them. That's all I'll say. So we've got to make sure we do not stop reminding our fellow Scots of the harm that Brexit has done time and time again. I don't agree with the EFTA route, by the way, just FYI, that's been raised. I don't know why we'd go into a partnership where laws are imposed upon us and we don't have any say, when we're exactly trying to get out of that situation in the UK. I just want to end on, kind of summing up tight pitch. I just want to end on what I said in my opening remarks. In the next 4 weeks, particularly our opponents and our media are going to do their best to drive a wedge between us as candidates, and they'll do their best to try to drive wedges in the party. Let's not fall into their trap. Let's make sure we do not fall into their trap. The country is looking at us, looking at our party, and actually we can persuade people towards independence if we conduct this debate in the best way possible. And I give you an absolute pledge. I give you an absolute pledge. As much as they might try, I'm not going to talk down any candidates. Yeah, we'll disagree with ideas. That's fine. That's robust. That's good. That's in the best traditions of particularly the west of Scotland Stair He Drammy, right? We get on, we have a discussion, we have a debate, but whoever ends up in it, I hope it's me. Of course, I wouldn't put myself in the contest if I didn't think I was the best person for the job. But whoever gets it, I promise you, I'm going to be the first person, one, to congratulate them. Secondly, I'm going to be the first person standing next to them when we're campaigning for independence.
Thank you. And first of all, as we wind this up, thank you to everybody who's taken part this evening. The decision to live stream this was absolutely the right one to do. There have been huge response elsewhere, but the most important response is from each individual party member. And this has been a credit to the SNP. I'm sure that the remaining, and there's an incredible number of hustings to come. I have great sympathy for these people. The remaining hustings are all going to be of this standard and nature. There are 9 in total that the party is organising, which this is a first. And then I believe there are 3 television hustings and 1 trade union husting. But we show the great ability, the great virtues, the great strengths, the depth of this party every time we have these meetings. Long may they continue, but not indefinitely, because there is a vote at the end of this. And I can remind members that the ballot papers will be sent either by email or, in the case of people who don't have email address, by post, going out on the 13th of March. They require to be returned on by the 27th of March, and the result will be declared thereafter. Thank you very much for attending. A big thank you to the candidates, and I look forward to seeing people on another live stream on Friday. Thank you.